Readers are welcome to leave comments in the comments section.
Claire knew she was in trouble the exact second Maya adjusted her headphones, leaned into the microphone, and let out a laugh that sounded like velvet dragged over gravel. It was 1:04 a.m. on a Tuesday, and rain was hammering against the glass of Studio B like an uninvited guest. Seattle was drowning in an October downpour, but inside the soundproof booth of K-Wave 90.3, the air felt warm, thick, and far too small for the two of them. "You're staring, Thorne," Maya said, her voice dropping an octave as she pulled the heavy Studio mic closer to her lips. She didn't look up from her soundboard, but the slow, lazy curve of her mouth gave her away. Claire caught herself holding her breath. She shifted her weight behind the audio console outside the booth, her fingers hovering over the soundboard sliders. "I'm not staring, Vance. I'm monitoring the audio levels. Your low frequencies are peaking because you're sitting too close to the receiver." Maya raised her eyes then. They were a dark, stormy hazel, sharp enough to see right through the glass partition. Slowly, deliberate in every movement, Maya leaned even closer, her lips barely a millimeter away from the foam guard. "Like this," Maya whispered into the live channel. The sound resonated directly into Claire's headphones, intimate and agonizingly clear. It felt less like a broadcast and more like a secret spoken directly into the shell of her ear. A shiver traced its way down Claire's spine, sharp and sudden. She bit the inside of her cheek, forcing her eyes down to the bouncing green and red LED meters on her board. "You're doing that on purpose," Claire muttered, her tone crisp, trying to anchor herself to her professional pride. "I'm giving the listeners what they want," Maya replied, taking off her headphones and tossing them onto the walnut desk. She pushed back her chair and stood up. "And right now, the listeners want a commercial break so I can get a decent cup of coffee." The door to the soundproof booth clicked open. The subtle scent of damp rain, cedarwood, and faint cinnamon flooded Claire's space. Maya walked out, stepping into the dim lighting of the control room. She was wearing an oversized leather jacket over a faded vintage bantee, her dark hair slightly tousled from the headset. Claire didn't look up, concentrating fiercely on setting a 60-second sponsor spot on the computer screen. "The coffee machine down the hall is broken. Unless you want hot water with a hint of rust, you're out of luck." Maya didn't leave. Instead, she leaned against the edge of Claire's desk, invading her personal space with infuriating ease. The fabric of her jacket brushed against Claire's bare arm, sending a quiet pulse of heat through her skin. "Then what are you drinking?" Maya asked quietly. "Green tea," Claire said, keeping her eyes fixed on the track monitor. "And it's mine." Without asking, Maya reached out, her long fingers brushing past Claire's hand to wrap around the ceramic mug sitting beside the keyboard. Claire's breath hitched at the brief skin-on-skin contact. Maya lifted the cup, took a slow sip, and closed her eyes in exaggerated appreciation. "Warm," Maya hummed, her eyes fluttering open to lock onto Claire's. "Bitter. Just like you." "Return my mug, Vance," Claire said, though there was no real edge to her voice. She felt exposed under Maya's gaze, as if the control room lights were suddenly twice as bright. "Make me," Maya murmured, setting the cup back down, but keeping her hand inches from Claire's. They stayed like that for 3 agonizing seconds, the hum of the electronic equipment around them, the rhythm of rain outside, and the silent, heavy gravity pulling them together. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. Maya's gaze drifted down to Claire's lips, then back up, lingering with an unspoken question that made Claire's pulse hammer against her ribs. The computer monitor flashed green. The sponsor track was ending. 5 seconds to air. Maya smiled, a tiny, wicked thing, and stepped back into the glass booth just as the red, on-air, light flickered back to life. Claire forced her hands to move across the board, adjusting the gain with practiced precision, but her pulse refused to slow down. She put her headphones back on, bracing herself. Maya flipped her switch. "Welcome back to the midnight shift," she said into the night, her voice smooth as whiskey. "If you're just tuning in, Seattle is soaked, the coffee is terrible, but the company, well, the company is keeping me remarkably warm tonight." Through the glass, Maya caught Claire's eye and gave a subtle, deliberate wink. Claire buried her face in her hands, her cheeks burning red, knowing full well that this night was going to ruin her. The shift ended at 3 a.m., but the storm showed no sign of letting up. The rain had turned into a steady, suffocating wall of water that blurred the neon streetlights of downtown Seattle into smeared streaks of red and yellow. Claire packed her canvas bag with meticulous care, wrapping her headphone cords into neat loops. She was a woman who liked order. She liked schedules, predictable sound waves, clear parameters, and clean cuts. Maya Vance was none of those things. Maya was chaotic noise. She was unpredictable volume spikes and off-script detours that threw the entire production schedule into disarray. Yet, every single night for the past 3 weeks since Claire transferred from the New York branch, Maya had been the only reason Claire looked forward to midnight. Claire pulled on her beige trench coat and walked toward the station's back exit. As she opened the heavy steel door, she found Maya standing on the covered loading dock, leaning against the brick wall with her hands shoved deep into her jacket pockets. A single yellow bulb illuminated the rain falling just beyond the awning. The cool air hit Claire's face, sharp and refreshing compared to the close heat of the studio. "Waiting for an Uber?" Claire asked, stopping a few feet away. Maya turned her head, her dark eyes reflecting the damp glow of the street lamp. "They cancelled 3 times. Apparently, nobody wants to drive through a flood at 3 in the morning." Claire checked her phone. Her own rideshare app was showing a 20-minute delay with surge pricing that was almost offensive. She sighed, tucking her hair behind her ear. "I parked 3 blocks away," Claire said softly, staring out at the sheet of grey water bouncing off the asphalt. "My apartment is on Capitol Hill." "You live somewhere near Pioneer Square, right?" 10 minutes from there, Maya said, stepping closer until she was standing right beside Claire at the edge of the shelter. The scent of rain mixed with her perfume was dizzying. "Are you offering me a ride, Thornton? I didn't think you liked me enough to share your oxygen for that long." "I don't," Claire replied smoothly, turning her face toward her. "But I'd feel guilty leaving a coworker to drown on the sidewalk." Maya let out a short, quiet laugh, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Liar. You just want an excuse to listen to my voice for another 20 minutes. Keep talking like that and you can walk," Claire warned, though a small smile threatened to break through her neutral expression. She unbuckled her large black umbrella and popped it open. It was a sturdy 2-person umbrella, but stepping out into the Seattle downpour meant they would have to stay exceptionally close if they wanted to stay dry. Claire held out her hand. "Ready?" Instead of walking under the umbrella, Maya reached out and wrapped her fingers around Claire's wrist, gently pulling her hand down. "Wait," Maya said, her voice dropping into that soft, velvet low tone she used when the mic was off. Claire stopped dead in her tracks. Maya's touch was warm against her skin, even through the chilly night air. Maya reached out with her free hand and brushed a stray lock of dark hair away from Claire's cheek, her thumb grazing Claire's cheekbone for a fraction of a second. The touch was so light, so tender, it felt like an electric shock. Your collar was tucked in, Maya whispered, her fingers lingering near the lapel of Claire's coat, carefully straightening it out. Her eyes were focused on Claire's face, unreadable and deep. There. Perfect. Claire swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Thanks, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Anytime, Maya smiled softly, letting her hand drop, though her eyes stayed fixed on Claire's. Lead the way, boss. They walked out into the rain, side by side, shoulders touching with every step. The umbrella provided a tiny dome of protection against the storm, but between the two of them, the heat was rising, dangerous and unmistakable. The drive to Pioneer Square was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the soft hum of an indie radio station playing in the background. The interior of Claire's Volvo was small and cozy. Maya had leaned her head back against the headrest, her eyes half closed, watching the neon signs melt into the wet windshield. You drive like an old lady, Maya murmured teasingly, break the silence. I drive like someone who values her safety and her insurance rates, Claire replied, keeping her hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Not everyone drives like they're trying to win an F1 race, Vance. Life's short, Thorn. You should speed up a little. I prefer control. Control is boring, Maya said, turning her head on the headrest to look at Claire's side profile. You spend all night controlling audio tracks, controlling levels, controlling your breathing whenever I get close to you. Claire's hands tightened slightly on the leather wheel. I don't lose control at work. No. Maya's voice was lower now, a dangerous thread of intimacy weaving into the cramped space of the car. What about outside of work? Claire pulled the car over to the curb in front of a brick apartment building in Pioneer Square. The hazard lights blinked silently, casting a rhythmic amber glow across both of their faces. Claire turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, leaving only the sound of rain drumming heavily on the roof. She turned to face Maya, leaning back against her door. Why do you do that? Do what? Maya asked, her eyes glittering in the dim light. Tease me, Claire said, her voice dropping its professional armor, leaving only raw honesty behind. You do it on the air. You do it in the control room. You're doing it right now. Is this just a game to keep yourself entertained on the late shift? Maya's playful posture melted away. She sat up, unbuckling her seatbelt, and leaned across the center console toward Claire. The air between them evaporated. Claire could see the subtle golden flecks in Maya's dark eyes, could feel the ambient heat radiating from her skin. Maya stopped just inches away, her breath light against Claire's lips. It's not a game, Claire, Maya said softly, using her real name for the first time all night. It sounded entirely different without the teasing edge, honest, grounded, and heavy with unspoken weight. If it were a game, I'd be winning. But every time I look at you, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Claire's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. In fact, every instinct in her body urged her to bridge the tiny gap remaining between them. Maya raised her hand, her fingers hovering near Claire's jaw, waiting for a signal, an invitation, a permission. Maya. Claire whispered, uncertain whether it was a plea to stop or a request to keep going. Before Maya could answer, her phone vibrated loudly in her jacket pocket, shattering the spell. Maya froze, leaning back slightly with a frustrated sigh. She pulled out the phone, glanced at the screen, an alarm marking the end of her shift rest period, and turned it off. The moment had passed, but the air remained thick with lingering tension. Maya looked back at Claire, a slow, soft smile returning to her lips, though this time it was laced with something deeper, almost vulnerable. She reached out and lightly tapped Claire's chin. "Thank you for the ride, Thorn," Maya said softly, opening the passenger door. Cold rain air rushed in, cutting through the heavy warmth. "Maya," Claire called out just as Maya was about to step into the rain. Maya looked back over her shoulder. "Yeah?" "Tomorrow night," Claire said, her voice steady and clear. "Don't be late for the opening track." Maya smiled, a radiant, quiet thing that made Claire's chest ache. "I'm never late when you're the one holding the board." She stepped out and closed the door. Claire watched through the rain-streaked window as Maya ran up the steps into her building, turning once at the door to wave before disappearing inside. Claire sat in the quiet car for a long time, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her heart still hammering a rapid rhythm against her chest. She looked at the empty passenger seat, then at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. She had spent her whole life controlling the sound. But as she started the engine and pulled out into the rainy Seattle street, Claire knew one thing for certain. Some storms were impossible to control, and Maya Vance was the biggest storm she had ever faced. The storm had abated by Wednesday evening, leaving Seattle wrapped in a thick, velvety mist that clung to the streetlights of First Avenue. Inside Studio B, the ambient light was low, cast only by the soft teal glow of the dual monitors and the amber warmth of the vintage vacuum tube amplifiers Claire had spent 2 hours calibrating before her shift. Claire adjusted her position in her leather chair, her fingers resting lightly on the main slider. Her coffee had long gone cold, but her pulse was running warm. Ever since she had pulled up to the curb outside Maya's Pioneer Square building 36 hours ago, her mind had been trapped in a loop, the smell of rain, the sudden drop in Maya's tone when she dropped her usual banter, and the agonizingly brief silence that had stretched between them in the cramped interior of her Volvo. The studio clock read 11:54 p.m. 6 minutes to broadcast. The heavy soundproof door turned on its hinges with a dull metallic click. Claire didn't need to look up to know who had walked in. The subtle shift in air pressure, accompanied by the scent of roasted coffee beans and damp cedarwood, announced Maya's arrival before her footsteps even crossed the threshold. "You're early," Claire said, keeping her eyes glued to the peak meter on her screen, though the numbers suddenly blurred into meaningless green bars. "I promised I wouldn't be late for the opening track," Maya replied smoothly. She stepped up behind Claire's chair, leaning down so close that the tip of her leather jacket brushed against the back of Claire's neck. "Besides, someone told me the audio engineer here gets cranky if the host doesn't check in." Claire spun her chair around, coming face to face with Maya. Up close, without the partition glass between them, Maya looked striking. Her dark hair was loosely pinned up, a few soft strands framing a jawline that seemed designed to hold someone's attention. She held out a paper cup from the local late-night coffee shop down the block. "Vanilla oat latte," Maya offered, a playful spark in her dark eyes. "No rust, no lukewarm water." A genuine truce offering. Claire looked at the cup, then up into Maya's eyes. "What's the trap?" "No trap," Maya murmured, her voice dropping into that quiet, intimate register that always made Claire feel like the floor was tilting. "Just a gesture of gratitude for not letting me freeze on the dock yesterday." Claire took the cup, her fingers brushing against Maya's palm in the exchange. Neither of them pulled away immediately. The contact lasted just a second longer than necessary, a deliberate, lingering beat that sent a quiet wave of heat tracing up Claire's arm. "Thank you," Claire whispered, her voice surprisingly soft. Maya smiled, a slow, unhurried expression that reached the corners of her eyes, before stepping back into the booth. Through the thick glass, Claire watched her put on her headphones, adjust her chair, and pull the heavy microphone close to her face. 2 minutes to air. Claire slid her own headphones on, feeling the heavy cushions isolate her from the quiet hum of the room. She flipped the main toggle, bridging the audio feed between her board and Maya's booth. Testing, 1, 2. Maya's voice came through the headphones, clear, intimate, and impossibly close. How do I sound to you tonight, Thorn? Claire looked up through the glass. Maya was staring directly at her, her chin resting on her hand, a lazy smirk pulling at her lips. Your gain is slightly high, Claire lied, forcing a businesslike tone while her fingers adjusted a dial that didn't need adjusting. Try not to lean so close to the filter unless you want the entire Pacific Northwest to hear you breathing. Maybe I want them to, Maya murmured into the channel, her tone a dangerous blend of playful and seductive. Or maybe I just want you to hear it. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She stared at Maya, her heart doing a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. Before she could craft a sharp comeback, the red timer hit 0. The on-air sign flared to bright red above the booth door. Claire slammed her thumb onto the track fader, bringing up the ambient jazz intro. We are live in 3, 2. Maya flipped her switch, her expression instantly morphing from personal teasing to professional allure. Good evening, Seattle. This is the midnight shift on K-Wave 90.3, coming to you live from a very quiet, very foggy night on the bay. Maya leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Claire's through the partition. Tonight, we're talking about things that stay unsaid. The quiet words that hang in the space between two people when the lights go down and the rest of the world goes to sleep. Claire sank into her chair, her hand hovering over the equalizer. Listening to Maya host was an exercise in slow self-destruction. Maya possessed an uncanny ability to speak to a crowd of 50,000 listeners while making every single person feel as though she were whispering to them alone in a dark room. But tonight, Claire knew, with a terrifying, thrilling certainty, that those words weren't meant for the 50,000 listeners across Washington state. They were meant for her. At 1:30 a.m., the station entered its long-form music block, leaving 45 minutes of automated tracks running. Claire took off her headphones, rubbing her temples. The air in the control room felt dense, heavy with an unspoken charge that had been building since the moment Maya sat down behind the mic. The booth door clicked open, and Maya walked out. She didn't head for the lounge or the break room. She walked straight to Claire's desk, her movements deliberate, unhurried, and completely captivating. You're very quiet tonight, Claire, Maya said softly, stopping right beside Claire's chair. Claire didn't look up immediately. She kept her fingers on her notebook, scribbling down track timestamps. I'm working. Someone has to keep this station running while you wax poetic about unspoken feelings. It wasn't just poetry, Maya said quietly. Claire's pen stopped moving. The ink bled into a small blue dot on the white paper. She slowly raised her head to look at Maya. Maya was leaning against the edge of the desk, her arms crossed over her chest, her dark hazel eyes fixed on Claire with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe. There was no teasing smile now, no playful smirk. Just an honest, sharp focus that made Claire feel utterly exposed. Maya, we're at work, Claire said, though her voice lacked any real authority. The doors are locked, the automation is running, and the red light is off, Maya countered softly, leaning down slightly so her face was level with Claire's. It's just us. It's always just us, Claire whispered, her throat dry. Then why do you keep putting up walls? Maya reached out, her fingers warm as they brushed against the side of Claire's neck, her fingertips lightly tracing the boundary where Claire's headphone strap had rested against her skin. Claire felt a sharp shiver run down her spine, her hands tightening on the edge of her desk. Because walls keep things professional, Vance. Walls keep me from making mistakes. Maya leaned in closer, her voice dropping into a hush that vibrated straight through Claire's chest. What if I don't want you to be professional? The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. Claire could hear the faint click of the studio clock, the low hum of the servers in the corner, and the rapid beat of her own pulse pounding in her ears. Maya was so close now that Claire could see the tiny gold specks in her hazel eyes, could feel the ambient warmth radiating off her skin. Claire's gaze flicked down to Maya's lips, then back up to her eyes. You're playing with fire. Then let me burn, Maya whispered. Maya didn't pull back. Instead, she lifted her other hand, her fingers gently cupping the side of Claire's jaw. The touch was impossibly soft, a delicate contrast to the overwhelming intensity of her gaze. She leaned in until her lips were mere millimeters from Claire's, holding herself there, waiting, granting Claire every opportunity to pull away. Claire didn't pull away. Instead, Claire closed her eyes, tilting her head slightly, her breath hitching as Maya's thumb lightly traced her lower lip. The air between them was electric, a tight wire drawn so taut it felt on the verge of snapping. Claire, Maya breathed, her voice a soft, fractured whisper against Claire's cheek. Before their lips could meet, a sharp, loud beep echoed through the control room. The automation system flashed yellow on the secondary monitor, a track error on the cue, requiring manual override before the silence detector triggered an emergency broadcast shutoff. The spell shattered instantly. Claire snapped her eyes open, her face burning as she pulled back, turning frantically to her keyboard. Her fingers flew across the soundboard, clearing the error and cueing the next track just as the previous song faded out seamlessly. She let out a long, shaky breath, keeping her eyes fixed on the screen as her hands trembled slightly over the controls. Maya remained standing beside the desk. She didn't look flustered or embarrassed. Instead, she let out a quiet, breathless laugh, running a hand through her dark hair as she looked down at Claire. Your timing is impeccable, Thorne, Maya said softly, though there was a clear thread of warmth and frustration lingering in her voice. Claire finally looked up, her cheeks still flushed, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. It's my job to prevent dead air. Maya leaned down one last time, her lips stopping right beside Claire's ear, close enough for her breath to tickle Claire's skin. That wasn't dead air, Claire, Maya murmured softly. That was the loudest thing I've heard all night. Without another word, Maya straightened up, gave Claire a slow, promising look, and walked back into the glass booth, leaving Claire alone in the control room, breathless, desperate, and completely undone. By Thursday midnight, the fog that had blanketed Seattle had transformed into a relentless, icy drizzle that blurred the neon glow of the Pike Place Market signs visible from the station's third-floor break room window. Inside Studio B, the temperature seemed to have risen by several degrees. The air was charged with a heavy, magnetic tension that had been accumulating over 3 consecutive night shifts. Claire sat at her master control desk, staring fixedly at the digital sound wave visuals creeping across her left monitor. She was meticulous, sharp, and focused, or at least, she was trying desperately to appear so. In reality, her focus was entirely shattered. Every tiny gesture from the woman inside the soundproof booth felt amplified. Across the thick glass, Maya sat with her legs crossed at the ankle, her back relaxed against the leather chair, her dark hair pulled back into a loose knot with stray tendrils framing her collarbone. She was wearing a soft, fitted charcoal sweater that looked deceptively casual, but every time she moved, the subtle shift of fabric drew Claire's eyes like a magnet. "We have about 3 minutes on this track, Claire," Maya's voice smooth-talked through the inner intercom line, breaking the silence in Claire's headphones. Claire didn't immediately look up. She adjusted a dial on the mixing console that was already perfectly balanced. "I know how to read a timer, Vance." "I know you do," Maya replied, her voice dropping into that low, warm, dangerous pitch that seemed reserved exclusively for off-air moments between the two of them. "You read everything so carefully. Timers, audio meters, cue sheets, everything except the room." Claire finally turned her head, meeting Maya's gaze through the clear partition. Maya wasn't looking at her script. She was resting her chin in her palm, her dark hazel eyes glittering with an unmistakable, teasing heat. "The room is fine," Claire said, keeping her tone clipped and professional, though her pulse betrayed her by speeding up against her ribs. "The audio levels are green, the signal strength is clear, and we haven't hit a single dead air warning tonight." "And what about us?" Maya asked softly. The question floated through the headset, intimate and sharp, bypassing all of Claire's carefully constructed defenses. "Are we green, Claire?" Claire swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She reached out and flipped the intercom toggle off, cutting the direct voice feed between them. Through the glass, Maya raised an eyebrow, a lazy, amused smirk spreading across her lips. She didn't press the button on her end to re-establish the connection. Instead, she simply kept her eyes locked on Claire's, her gaze slow, deliberate, and undeniably heavy. Claire took a deep breath, forcing herself to look away and concentrate on the track cue. 2 minutes until the commercial break. She reached for her water glass, but her hand was trembling just enough to make the ice cubes clink against the crystal. She was losing control. For 3 years in New York, Claire had been known as the most disciplined, unshakable engineer in the network. She could handle equipment failures, celebrity meltdowns, and live broadcast emergencies without her heart rate rising by a single beat. But 30 minutes in a room with Maya Vance was enough to make her feel like an amateur stumbling through her first day on the job. The track on the main monitor ended. Claire hit the trigger for the automated station identification, swung her chair around, and grabbed her clipboard. She needed air. She needed cold water. Most importantly, she needed 10 seconds away from the magnetic field that seemed to surround Maya. She stood up, but before she could take 2 steps toward the door, the heavy soundproof door of Studio B swung open. Maya stepped into the control room, blocking the narrow walkway between the desk and the exit. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, looking down at Claire, her expression unreadable in the dim, blue-tinted light of the equipment racks. "Excuse me," Claire said softly, holding her clipboard against her chest like a shield. "I was going to get some fresh water from the break room." "No, you weren't," Maya said gently, stepping forward. The distance between them vanished in an instant. Claire's back hit the edge of her wooden desk, trapping her between the control board and Maya's lingering presence. The familiar scent of cedarwood, soft rain, and dark espresso washed over Claire, instantly short-circuiting her thoughts. "Maya," Claire murmured, her voice barely a breath. "You turned off the intercom," Maya whispered, taking another small step until her knees almost brushed Claire's legs. She raised her right hand, her long fingers coming up to touch the heavy leather band of Claire's headphones still resting around her neck. "Why did you turn it off, Claire?" Were you afraid of what I was going to say next? I was managing the broadcast, Claire lied, her eyes darting down to Maya's mouth before snapping back up to her hazel eyes. Liar, Maya hummed, her thumb lightly grazing the soft skin right beneath Claire's jawline. The contact was electric, sending a sharp, sweet shiver straight down Claire's spine. You turn off the audio whenever things get too real. You hide behind your sliders and your buttons because you think if you control the sound, you can control how you feel. Claire's heart was hammering so violently against her ribs that she was certain Maya could hear it over the low hum of the servers. I like structure, Claire said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. Structure keeps things from breaking. And what if I want us to break a little? Maya asked. Her voice was barely a whisper now, thick with an authenticity that stripped away all her usual smooth broadcaster armor. Maya's hand moved from Claire's jaw up to the back of her neck, her fingers tangling gently into the soft, dark hair at the base of Claire's head. She leaned in, slow and deliberate, giving Claire every fraction of a second to step aside, to push her away, to enforce the rules. Claire didn't move. She couldn't. Her entire body seemed pulled toward Maya by an irresistible gravitational force. She let go of the clipboard, letting it slide onto the desk behind her, and reached out, her fingers catching the soft fabric of Maya's charcoal sweater at her waist. Maya, Claire breathed, the word a confession in itself. I've been wanting to do this since the second you walked into my studio 3 weeks ago, Maya whispered against Claire's lips. And then, the space between them vanished completely. The kiss was slow, warm, and devastatingly deep. It was not a tentative touch, it was the release of 3 weeks of unspoken lingering glances, teasing banter, and late-night static. Maya's lips were impossibly soft, moving against Claire's with a hungry, unhurried patience that made Claire's knees feel dangerously weak. Claire let out a quiet, gasping sigh into Maya's mouth, her fingers tightening in Maya's sweater, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them at all. Maya's other arm slid around Claire's waist, holding her firm against the edge of the desk, deepening the kiss with a possessive, breathtaking intensity. The control room around them melted away. There was no radio station, no rain outside, no broadcast schedule, only the taste of Maya, the warmth of her body pressed against Claire's, and the dizzying, beautiful rush of total surrender. Maya's thumb traced the curve of Claire's cheekbone, her touch turning impossibly gentle even as the kiss burned hotter. Claire tilted her head back, opening her mouth to Maya, letting every remaining wall, rule, and boundary collapse into dust. For a long, intoxicating minute, time seemed to stop entirely. When Maya finally pulled back, she didn't go far. She rested her forehead against Claire's, her breath coming in quick, uneven hitches that mirrored Claire's own ragged breathing. Her hazel eyes were dark, glowing with a soft, triumphant vulnerability that took Claire's breath away all over again. Claire stared at her, her lips parted, her face flushed red, her chest rising and falling rapidly. That. Claire gasped, struggling to find her voice. That wasn't in the production schedule. Maya let out a quiet, breathless laugh, her dark eyes crinkling at the corners. She leaned in and pressed one more soft, sweet kiss to the corner of Claire's mouth before slowly stepping back, though her hand lingered on Claire's waist until the very last second. Some things are better unscripted, Thorne, Maya whispered, her voice husky and rich with emotion. On the main computer monitor behind them, the red warning light for the upcoming live vocal segment began to flash rhythmically, signaling 15 seconds until the commercial break concluded. Maya gave Claire a long, lingering look, a beautiful, genuine smile touching her lips, before turning and stepping back into the glass booth. She pulled the heavy door shut, sat down at her desk, and put on her headphones. Claire stood by the desk for 3 seconds, trying to gather her scattered thoughts, her heart still beating wildly against her ribs. She wiped her thumb across her lower lip, feeling the lingering warmth of Maya's kiss. Taking a deep breath, Claire sat back down in her leather chair, put her headset on, and placed her fingers on the master control board. Her hands were still shaking, but a feeling of profound, intoxicating clarity had taken over. She flipped the live feed toggle back on. Through the glass, Maya looked directly at Claire. She pulled the microphone close to her lips, her eyes locked on Claire's with an intensity that made Claire's heart skip a beat. "Welcome back to the midnight shift," Maya said softly into the microphone, her voice vibrating through Claire's headphones like silk over steel. "If you're still awake with us out there in the dark, I hope you're holding on to someone who makes your heart race. Because tonight, Seattle, tonight, the signal has never been clearer." Claire looked up through the glass, a slow, quiet smile finally breaking across her own face as she adjusted the audio slider, holding the frequency perfectly in place. The silence that followed the end of Thursday night's broadcast was different from any silence Claire had ever experienced. It wasn't the heavy, tense quiet of unresolved frustration, nor was it the sterile stillness of an empty soundstage. It was electric, heavy with the weight of what had finally transpired between them on the edge of the master control desk. It was 3:15 a.m. The station's automated playlist was running smoothly for the remaining hours of the morning, cycling through soft indie ambient tracks that echoed faintly through the studio monitor speakers. Claire sat at her console, her fingers resting lightly on the smooth plastic casing of her keyboard. Her heart rate had gradually slowed from its erratic frantic pace, but her skin still felt strangely warm, especially where Maya's hand had rested against her waist. Inside the booth, Maya was packing up her notes. She worked unhurriedly, stacking her printed scripts into a neat pile, her movements fluid and calm. Every few seconds, her eyes would flick up toward the glass partition, catching Claire's gaze with a look that was so soft, so openly affectionate, that Claire had to force herself to remember how to breathe properly. The heavy soundproof door clicked open. Maya walked out, slinging her leather jacket over her shoulder instead of putting it on. She walked straight over to Claire's desk, taking a seat on the edge of the adjacent workstation, her long legs stretching out into the narrow aisle. "You're avoiding my eyes, Thorn," Maya said gently, a quiet thread of warmth running through her low voice. Claire looked up from her screen, meeting Maya's dark hazel eyes directly. "I'm not avoiding you. I'm finishing the shift logs. Network guidelines require the engineer to submit the technical report before leaving the building." "Guidelines," Maya echoed, her mouth curving into that familiar, devastatingly attractive smirk. "Always hiding behind the employee handbook." "It's not hiding if it's my job," Claire replied, though there was no real conviction in her tone. She leaned back in her high-backed chair, looking up at Maya. "And for the record, I wasn't the one who nearly triggered a silence alarm because I was distracted." "Distracted?" Maya leaned down slightly, her dark eyes locking onto Claire's lips before rising back to her eyes. "Is that what you call what happened 20 minutes ago? A distraction?" Claire felt her cheeks heat up, a subtle blush spreading across her neck. "You know what I mean, Vance." "Say my name," Maya murmured, her playful tone shifting instantly into something far more intimate, far more intense. She reached out, her fingers gently hovering over Claire's hand where it rested on the armrest of the chair. Without the last name. Without the professional shield. Claire stared at Maya's outstretched hand, feeling the familiar pull in her chest, that magnetic, inescapable force that had been drawing her toward this woman since her first night in Seattle. She slid her hand upward, weaving her fingers into Maya's, feeling the warmth of Maya's palm against her own. Maya, Claire whispered, the words soft, genuine, and completely undefended. Maya's eyes softened, a tiny, breathless sigh escaping her lips. She tightened her grip on Claire's hand, pulling it gently toward her chest. Better. Much better. We can't keep doing this here, Claire said, though she didn't pull her hand back. She looked toward the hallway door, acutely aware of the janitorial staff or early morning news anchors who might be wandering the corridors of K-Wave 90.3. If management finds out about whatever this is, they'll transfer one of us to a different shift. Or a different station entirely. Then let them, Maya said without a second of hesitation. Claire blinked, surprised by the absolute confidence in Maya's voice. Maya, this is your career. You've built the midnight shift into the highest-rated late-night slot in the city. And I like my show, Maya agreed, her thumb gently tracing the smooth knuckles of Claire's hand. But I didn't care about coming to work every night until you walked into this room with your clipboard, your neat little schedules, and that sharp, terrifying focus of yours. The show is just radio, Claire. This, you and me, this is real. The confession hung in the quiet air of the control room, raw and unpolished. It was entirely free of Maya's usual broadcaster polish, stripped of any teasing performance. Claire felt a lump form in her throat, her chest aching with a sweet, overwhelming heat that made her eyes sting slightly. You're insane, Claire whispered, a breathless laugh breaking through her composure. Probably, Maya smiled, stepping down from the desk and standing right in front of Claire's chair. She reached down, cupping Claire's cheeks in both hands, her thumbs lightly brushing over her cheekbones. Come home with me. The invitation was simple, quiet, and loaded with meaning. It was not a casual suggestion, nor was it a joke. Claire looked up into Maya's eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation, any lingering trace of game-playing. She found none. Only a quiet, steady patience that made Claire's heart leap into her throat. My car is in the parking garage, Claire said softly, her hands reaching up to rest over Maya's wrists. Then I'll drive, Maya murmured, leaning down to press a soft, sweet kiss to the center of Claire's forehead. You've been in control all night. Let me take the wheel for once. The drive to Maya's apartment in Pioneer Square was remarkably quiet, but it was a silence completely unlike the awkward stillness of their previous rides. The rain had cleared entirely, leaving the wet asphalt of Seattle's streets reflecting the quiet yellow glow of the streetlights and the dark, looming shapes of the downtown skyscrapers. Maya drove with one hand on the steering wheel of her sleek, older model sedan, her other hand resting on the center console, palm open. Claire didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in Maya's, their fingers interlacing naturally, as if they had been doing this for years rather than hours. When they pulled into the underground parking structure of Maya's historic brick building, the engine cut out, plunging the car interior into a soft, shadowy dimness. Neither of them moved for a moment. The soft click of the cooling engine was the only sound breaking the quiet. Maya turned in her seat, looking over at Claire. The dim overhead lighting caught the soft line of her throat and the dark, rich depth of her eyes. Still nervous? Maya asked softly, her voice carrying that low, velvet resonance that always seemed to hum straight through Claire's bones. A little, Claire admitted, her voice honest. I'm used to predictability, Maya. I'm used to knowing what happens next. Maya reached across, her fingers lightly trailing along the side of Claire's jaw, her touch so gentle it felt like a whisper against her skin. "I can't give you a script, Claire. But I can promise you that you don't have to worry about losing control when you're with me." Claire leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a brief second as a profound sense of comfort washed over her. The sharp, guarded armor she had worn for years, the strict professionalism, the rigid distance, was melting away, piece by piece, leaving only this deep, magnetic truth between them. "Okay," Claire whispered, opening her eyes to meet Maya's. "Lead the way." Maya's apartment was an airy, high-ceilinged loft with exposed brick walls, heavy wooden beams, and expansive arched windows that overlooked the quiet, mist-shrouded alleyways of Pioneer Square. The interior was dimly lit by a few warm floor lamps, casting long, soft shadows across hardwood floors covered in plush vintage rugs. The space smelled distinctly of Maya, cedar, faint lavender, and warm paper from the stacks of books and record sleeves lining the long bookshelves along the eastern wall. Maya tossed her keys into a small ceramic dish near the entry hall and turned around. Claire was standing near the doorway, taking in the space, her coat still draped over her arm. Without a word, Maya walked over, taking Claire's coat and hanging it neatly on the rack beside her own leather jacket. When she turned back, she stepped directly into Claire's personal space, her hands coming up to rest gently on Claire's waist. Claire looked up, her pulse quickening as Maya leaned in, resting her forehead against Claire's. "No microphones," Maya whispered softly, her breath warm against Claire's lips. "No soundboards. No broadcast. Just us," Claire murmured, completing the thought that had lived between them for days. "Just us," Maya agreed. Maya's lips found Claire's in a kiss that was vastly different from the urgent, sudden passion they had shared in the control room. This kiss was slow, deep, and impossibly tender, filled with a quiet reverence that made Claire's soul ache with warmth. Maya's hands moved up, her fingers sliding through Claire's dark hair, holding her close, anchor-tight, as if Claire were the only solid thing in an uncertain world. Claire gasped softly into the kiss, her arms wrapping securely around Maya's shoulders, pulling herself flush against Maya's body. The soft fabric of Maya's sweater felt warm beneath her hands, and the subtle, steady rhythm of Maya's heart beating against her own chest was the sweetest melody Claire had ever heard. They moved together through the quiet, softly lit apartment, every step unhurried, every touch deliberate. When Maya pulled back slightly to look at Claire, her dark eyes were glowing with a soft, fierce devotion that left no room for doubt, no room for fear, and no room for distance. Maya smiled, a small, radiant, breathtaking expression, and kissed the tip of Claire's nose before slipping her hand back into Claire's, leading her deeper into the warmth of the home they were now sharing. Outside, the first faint light of dawn began to paint the Seattle sky in shades of deep indigo and pale rose, but inside, wrapped in the warmth of each other's arms, the midnight shift had finally found its home. The pale indigo light of a rainy Seattle dawn crept through the tall arched windows of Maya's Pioneer Square loft, casting long, peaceful shadows across the dark hardwood floor. Outside, the steady drizzle of Friday morning tapped against the glass like a soft, rhythmic lullaby, but inside, the high-ceilinged room was bathed in the warm, golden glow of a single brass floor lamp. Claire lay propped up against a stack of oversized linen pillows on Maya's low platform bed, wrapped in a heavy knit blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and sandalwood. She held a steaming ceramic mug of Earl Grey tea between both hands, watching the wisps of steam curl into the cool air. For the first time in 3 years, her mind wasn't running through a mental checklist of sound checks, track cues, or equipment maintenance schedules. The constant, buzzing tape loop in her head had finally gone silent, replaced by a quiet, miraculous stillness. The faint rustle of bedsheets drew Claire's attention. Maya was sitting cross-legged at the foot of the bed, wearing an oversized worn-in grey heather t-shirt, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders in soft, messy waves. She was holding a wooden guitar, her long fingers idly plucking out a quiet, wandering melody that filled the room like morning light. "You're watching me again, Thorn," Maya said without looking up, though the soft curve of a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Claire took a slow sip of her tea, letting the warmth settle in her chest. "I'm analyzing your technique. Your fingerpicking is slightly out of tempo." Maya let out a low, husky laugh that made Claire's heart do a familiar, delicious flutter. She set the guitar down against the bedpost, shifted closer, and slid under the heavy blanket beside Claire. She leaned her shoulder against Claire's, her warmth instantly seeping through the fabric of Claire's shirt. "Always the audio engineer," Maya murmured, reaching out to brush a dark strand of hair away from Claire's temple. Her fingers lingered against Claire's skin, trailing lightly down the side of her neck before resting on her shoulder. "Can't turn off the critic even at 6 in the morning." "It's a habit," Claire whispered, her voice soft and heavy with lingering sleep. She set her mug down on the bedside table and turned her body toward Maya, resting her head against the crook of Maya's neck. "Besides, someone has to make sure you stay sharp." Maya's arm wrapped securely around Claire's waist, pulling her impossibly close. She buried her face in Claire's hair, taking a long, quiet breath. "I don't need to stay sharp when I'm here with you, Claire. I just want to exist." The words were so simple, yet they struck Claire with the force of a sudden wave. In the high-stakes world of live radio broadcasting, Maya Vance was always expected to be sharp, electric, and endlessly entertaining. She was the magnetic voice that carried thousands of lonely listeners through the night. But here, in the quiet solitude of her home, she was vulnerable, honest, and entirely Claire's. Claire reached up, her fingers lightly tracing the strong line of Maya's jawline, sliding upward to touch the soft skin beneath her cheekbone. "You don't have to perform for me, Maya. You never did." Maya pulled back just enough to look into Claire's eyes. Her hazel gaze was dark and clear, holding a fierce, tender devotion that made Claire's breath hitch in her throat. "I know," Maya whispered. "That's why I fell in love with you." The quiet room seemed to tilt on its axis. The 4 words hung in the space between them, bright and unshakable, carrying no hesitation, no performance, and no fear. Claire stared at her, her heart pounding a heavy, rapid rhythm against her ribs. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming, terrifying joy that swept through every corner of her soul. "Say that again," Claire choked out, a breathless, tearful laugh escaping her lips. Maya smiled, a radiant, beautiful expression that lit up her entire face. She raised her hand, her thumb gently wiping away a stray tear from Claire's cheek, before leaning in to press her lips softly against Claire's forehead, then her cheek, and finally against her lips in a deep, reverent kiss. "I love you, Claire Thorn," Maya murmured against her lips, her voice vibrating straight into Claire's chest. "I loved you when you glared at me through the studio glass on your first day, I loved you when you handed me that bitter green tea, and I love you right now." Claire wrapped her arms tightly around Maya's neck, pulling her down until there was no space left between them. She kissed Maya back with a fierce, helpless passion, pouring every unspoken feeling, every late-night sigh, and every secret pulse of desire into the touch. "I love you too, Maya," Claire breathed into the kiss, her fingers entangling into Maya's soft hair. "God help me, I love you so much." Maya let out a quiet sigh, deepening the kiss, her hands moving down to hold Claire firmly by the hips. They sank back onto the soft mountain of pillows together, wrapped in the warmth of the heavy blanket, as the grey morning light slowly transformed into a soft, glowing gold across the bedroom floor. By noon, the rain had completely stopped, leaving the streets of Seattle glistening beneath a pale, cloud-filtered sun. In the kitchen of the loft, the rich aroma of fresh espresso and toasted sourdough filled the air. Maya stood near the exposed brick counter, wearing an apron over her clothes, pouring hot water into a glass French press with careful precision. Claire sat on a tall wooden stool at the breakfast bar, wrapped in one of Maya's cozy flannel shirts, her legs crossed at the knee. She had her laptop open in front of her, reviewing the technical logs for the upcoming weekend broadcasts. Maya set a fresh cup of coffee down next to Claire's laptop, leaning over the counter to press a lingering kiss against Claire's shoulder. "You're supposed to be on leave until Monday, Miss Technical Director. Put the computer away." Claire smiled, closing the laptop lid with a soft click. "I'm just making sure the fill-in engineer doesn't mess up your microphone settings for tonight's automated rerun." "Let them mess it up," Maya said, taking a seat on the stool beside Claire and taking a sip from her own mug. "I'm not thinking about the broadcast tonight. I'm thinking about taking you to the waterfront." Claire looked over at her, raising an eyebrow. "The waterfront? In this weather?" "It's classic Seattle, Thorne," Maya teased, reaching out to hook her pinky finger around Claire's. "A walk along the pier, cold sea air, and hot fish and chips from Evo's. It's an absolute requirement for living here." "Are you taking me on a proper date, Vance?" Claire asked, a soft, teasing spark glinting in her dark eyes. "I am taking my girlfriend on a date," Maya corrected smoothly, her eyes locked onto Claire's face with deliberate, affectionate emphasis. "Unless you have a technical objection to the title." Claire felt a warm blush creep up her neck, but this time she didn't try to hide it or hide behind her usual professional armor. She leaned across the counter, sliding her hand up the side of Maya's neck, and pulled her into a brief, sweet kiss. "No objections," Claire whispered against Maya's lips. "The title is completely approved." Maya laughed softly, her hand coming up to cup Claire's chin, resting her forehead against hers. "Good. Because I'm never letting you drop that title." Later that evening, long after their walk along the mist-covered pier and their late lunch by the water, Claire and Maya returned to the studio building on First Avenue, not to work, but to pick up Claire's forgotten umbrella and bag from the control room office. The third floor of K-Wave 90.3 was dark and quiet, the hallway illuminated only by the emergency exit signs and the faint amber glow from the production offices. They walked down the hallway hand in hand, their fingers tightly intertwined, their footsteps echoing softly against the carpeted floor. When they reached Studio B, Claire pushed the heavy door open. The control room was dark, the monitors sleeping in standby mode, the large mixing console sitting quiet and still in the dim blue night light. Through the thick glass partition, the interior of the broadcast booth looked tranquil, the single hanging microphone suspended in the shadows like a quiet sentinel. Claire stood by her master control desk, looking at the smooth leather chair where she had spent so many anxious, late-night hours trying to guard her heart against the woman standing beside her. Maya stepped up behind her, wrapping her arms around Claire's waist and resting her chin softly on Claire's shoulder. They stood together in the dark control room, looking at their own reflections mirrored in the thick partition glass. "It looks so quiet when the red light is off," Claire murmured softly, leaning back into Maya's warm embrace. "The room might be quiet," Maya whispered, her lips softly touching the side of Claire's neck, sending a delicate shiver straight through her skin. "But every time I look into this studio now, all I hear is you." Claire turned around in Maya's arms, wrapping her hands around Maya's waist, looking up into those dark hazel eyes that had become her whole world. There were no broadcast meters running, no station identifications playing, and no thousands of anonymous listeners tuned into their frequency. But as Maya leaned down to kiss her again, slow, warm, and endlessly sweet, Claire knew that they had finally found the only frequency that truly mattered. The signal was loud, pure, and crystal clear. And this time, it was never going off the air. The following Tuesday night brought another classic Seattle score, beating a fierce, rhythmic pulse against the high windows of K-Wave 90.3. It was 11:45 p.m., and the station's third floor felt tucked away from the rest of the world, suspended in a pocket of warm amber lighting, quiet equipment hums, and thick grey rain. In the control room, Claire sat before her master mixing board, fine-tuning the auxiliary channels. She wore a soft cream-colored sweater with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, her hair clipped back casually. She looked relaxed, but her sharp focus remained uncompromised. There was, however, a fundamental shift in her demeanor. The tense, rigid posture she had maintained during her first month in Seattle had dissolved entirely. Her movements were smooth, confident, and fluid. Whenever her eyes drifted toward the glass partition, a gentle, unconscious softness touched the corners of her lips. Through the glass, Maya was arranging her notes for the night's broadcast. She was wearing a deep burgundy velvet button-down, unbuttoned at the collar, with the sleeves rolled to her forearms. She caught Claire looking and offered a subtle, devastatingly handsome smirk, winking deliberately before pulling her mic into position. Claire flipped her intercom toggle. 15 minutes to air, Vance. Try to remember we have 2 commercial sponsor cues in the first half hour tonight. Last week you spoke right through the local news sting. I was inspired, Maya's voice came humming through Claire's headphones, rich and teasing. Can you blame me when the executive engineer looks like $1 million across the board? Claire let out a quiet, breathless laugh, adjusting her headset. I can and I will, if management flags us for a timing error. Play nice tonight. I'm always nice, Maya insisted softly into the live channel, her tone shifting into that dangerous, intimate low frequency. Especially to you, Thorn. Maya. Claire warned, though a deep blush bloomed across her chest, warming her skin under her sweater. All right, Maya chuckled, holding up her hands in defeat. Sponsor cues locked in. I'll be on my absolute best behavior. Promise. 10 minutes later, the digital clock on Claire's central monitor flashed red, counting down the final seconds. Claire pulled up the ambient background track, hit the master live switch, and gave Maya a quick hand signal through the glass. 3, 2, 1. The red, on-air, light flared to life above the soundproof door. Maya leaned into her microphone, her voice gliding effortlessly into the airwaves. Good evening, Pacific Northwest. This is the midnight shift on K-Wave 90.3. Outside, Seattle is putting on quite a show, rain on the pavement, wind in the fir trees, and a fog so thick you could lose yourself in it. She leaned back in her swivel chair, her dark eyes locking straight onto Claire's through the partition. Tonight, we're talking about finding anchor points. About those rare moments when you're drifting in the storm, and suddenly somebody catches your hand and steady ground appears out of nowhere. Claire leaned forward, resting her elbows on the console, her chin in her hands. Hearing Maya speak about love on the air had always been intoxicating, but knowing now, without an ounce of doubt, that every poetic cadence was an open, unshielded declaration meant for her alone made Claire's chest swell with a sweet, ache-like warmth. If you've found that person, Maya continued, her hazel eyes gleaming with soft affection behind the glass, don't let the noise of the world drown them out. Hold on tight. Claire smiled, adjusting a subtle treble balance on Maya's vocal track, keeping her voice framed in rich, golden warmth for the thousands listening across the state. At 1:15 a.m., during an extended 10-minute music set featuring indie synth tracks, Maya walked out of the broadcast booth into the control room. She didn't stop at the coffee station. She didn't check her phone. She walked straight to Claire's swivel chair, leaned down, and slid her arms around Claire's shoulders from behind, burying her face into the curve of Claire's neck. Claire let out a soft sigh of satisfaction, leaning back against Maya's chest, covering Maya's hands with her own. You're supposed to be reviewing your caller line queue for segment 2. The caller queue can wait, Maya murmured, her warm breath tickling the skin behind Claire's ear, making a delicious shiver run down Claire's spine. I needed to re-anchor myself. Claire turned her head slightly, pressing a soft kiss against Maya's jawline. Did my technical mixing meet your high artistic standards tonight? Your technical mixing is perfection, Maya whispered, her lips trailing along Claire's cheekbone until they reached the corner of her mouth, pressing a slow, tender kiss there that lingered until Claire's breathing grew ragged. You make me sound better than I actually am. Impossible, Claire said quietly, turning fully in her chair to face her. You have the best natural resonance of any host on the West Coast, Vance. I just clean up the edges. Maya's hands moved to rest on Claire's waist, her thumb lightly caressing the soft fabric of Claire's sweater. Her expression softened, the playful teasing giving way to a quiet, profound reverence. I love you, Claire, Maya whispered softly. I love you, Maya, Claire replied instantly, reaching up to wrap her arms around Maya's neck, pulling her down for another slow, breathtaking kiss. There was no urgency now, no desperate fear of being interrupted or discovered. The security of their love had transformed the once intimidating control room into a sanctuary. When Maya pulled back, her eyes were dark and glowing, filled with an unshakable peace. Come with me to Portland this weekend, Maya suggested suddenly, her hands smoothing down Claire's arms. No broadcasts, no studio gear. Just a small cabin near the river, rain on the roof, and 2 days of total quiet. Claire's eyes brightened. Are you taking me away from my soundboard? I'm taking you away from everything so I can have you all to myself, Maya said smoothly, a charming smirk returning to her lips. What do you say, executive engineer? I say, Claire smiled, resting her forehead against Maya's, that it sounds like the best production plan you've ever pitched. The second half of the broadcast flew by in a blur of warm banter, seamless music transitions, and quiet, shared smiles across the glass. When the clock hit 3 a.m., the automated night log took over, and the red light above the door faded back to black. Claire packed her canvas bag, leaving her equipment prepped neatly for the morning crew. Maya walked out of the booth, wearing her heavy leather jacket against the chill of the rainy night, holding her dark umbrella in one hand. As they walked out of the station building into the cool, rain-washed alleyway near Pioneer Square, the city was dead quiet. The streetlights reflected off the wet brick walls in long ribbons of gold and red. Maya opened the large black umbrella and held it over both of their heads. She pulled Claire close against her side, her arm wrapping firmly around Claire's waist as they walked side by side toward the parked car. Claire looked up at the night sky, watching the misty drizzle swirl around the street lamps. 3 weeks ago, she had arrived in Seattle feeling isolated, guarded, and consumed by a cold need for total control. Now, walking through the quiet rain with Maya's warmth pressed against her, she realized that letting go of control had been the greatest decision of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Maya asked softly, her dark eyes looking down at Claire with deep affection. Claire leaned her head against Maya's shoulder as they walked, a soft, content smile gracing her lips. "I'm thinking," Claire said quietly, "that I love the sound of the rain in Seattle." Maya let out a rich, warm laugh that echoed softly in the quiet street, tightening her grip around Claire's waist as she leaned down to press a sweet kiss to the top of Claire's head. "Me too, Thorn," Maya whispered into the night. "Me too." They crossed the wet street together, shielded from the storm under a single umbrella, moving forward into a future that was bright, beautiful, and perfectly tuned. Friday afternoon arrived with a soft, miraculous break in the dark cloud cover. The heavy downpours that had defined Seattle all week gave way to a crisp, autumn chill, leaving the air smelling cleanly of salt, pine, and pine needle resin. Inside Maya's vintage sedan, the heater hummed a quiet, reassuring warmth. The car was rolling smoothly southward along Highway 101, winding its way through the dense green forests of the Pacific Northwest toward the rugged Oregon coastline. In the passenger seat, Claire rested her elbow against the window frame, her head leaning comfortably against her hand as she watched the endless wall of majestic Douglas firs pass by in a blur of deep emerald and slate gray. Her usual laptop bag and technical binders were absent, replaced by a simple duffel bag tucked into the trunk. For the first time since leaving New York, her shoulders were completely relaxed, freed from the invisible weight of endless production schedules and tight audio margins. Maya drove with relaxed grace, her left hand resting casually on the top of the steering wheel, her dark hair pulled back into a messy knot at the crown of her head. She wore an ivory cable-knit sweater with the sleeves pushed up her forearms, her profile outlined by the pale, hazy sunlight filtering through the cloud-broken sky. Her right hand rested open on the leather upholstery of the center console. Without breaking her gaze from the road, Maya extended her fingers slightly. Claire smiled softly, turning her hand over and sliding her fingers neatly into Maya's, clasping them tight. "You've been quiet for 30 miles, Thorn," Maya said softly, her thumb making small, reassuring circles over the back of Claire's knuckles. "Are you experiencing withdrawal from your soundboard?" "Not even a little," Claire murmured, turning her head on the headdress to look at Maya's profile. "I was just thinking about how strange it feels." "Strange?" Maya flicked her dark eyes toward Claire for a brief, warm second before returning her attention to the winding coastal road. "In a good way or a bad way?" "In a breathtaking way," Claire admitted, her voice soft and entirely unarmored. "A month ago, I thought my life was completely defined by neat decibel limits and structured routines. I thought keeping people at a distance was the only way to protect my work. And now?" Claire trailed off, her eyes dropping down to where their hands were locked together over the console. "And now?" Maya prompted gently, her voice carrying that low, velvet resonance that always made Claire feel completely safe. "And now I'm heading to a secluded cabin in the woods with the woman who ruined all my rules," Claire said, a small, radiant smile touching her lips. "And I've never been happier." Maya let out a rich, warm laugh that vibrated softly in the quiet car interior. She raised Claire's hand to her lips, pressing a slow, tender kiss against the soft skin of her inner wrist before resting their joined hands back onto her knee. "Rules are meant to be rewritten, Claire," Maya murmured, her hazel eyes gleaming with soft, unmistakable devotion. "Especially the ones that keep you from getting what you actually want." The cabin sat nestled on a high-timbered bluff overlooking a secluded cove near Cannon Beach. It was a charming, rustic structure built from heavy cedar logs and weathered river stone, surrounded by towering coastal pines that swayed gently in the chilly sea breeze. Below the cliff, the dark blue Pacific crush rolled against the black sand beach in a rhythmic, thundering hum. By the time Maya pulled the car up the gravel driveway, twilight was painting the horizon in breathtaking shades of deep indigo, burnt orange, and pale rose. Claire stepped out of the vehicle, pulling her beige wool coat tight around her chest as the sharp, cold sea air hit her face. It was completely different from the close, warm humidity of Studio B, but it felt remarkably invigorating. Maya walked around the trunk, carrying their bags over her shoulder. She stepped up beside Claire, looking out over the roaring ocean mist below. "What do you think?" Maya asked softly, stepping close enough that her arm brushed against Claire's shoulder. Claire took a deep, lingering breath of the salty ocean air, turning her head to look at Maya. In the dimming evening light, Maya's features looked stunningly defined, her dark eyes reflecting the warm orange glow of the sunset, her lips curved into a quiet, hopeful expression. "It's perfect, Maya," Claire said honestly. "It doesn't sound like a radio station at all." "Good," Maya smiled, reaching out to wrap her arm securely around Claire's waist, pulling her flush against her side. That was the entire point. They walked up the short wooden steps to the porch together. Maya unlocked the heavy oak door, pushing it open to reveal a spacious, cozy interior dominated by a large stone fireplace, high vaulted ceilings, and large floor-to-ceiling glass windows that framed the spectacular view of the ocean. While Maya set their bags down near the bedroom doorway and knelt by the hearth to light the pre-stacked wood, Claire walked slowly over to the panoramic window. The sound of the ocean outside was deep, natural, and low, a massive, continuous white noise that filled the quiet room. Maya struck a match, touching it to the dry kindling. Within seconds, a warm amber flame burst to life, casting flickering light and dancing shadows across the exposed wood walls and plush wool rugs. She stood up, dusting her hands on her jeans, and walked over to stand behind Claire. Maya slid her arms around Claire's waist, pulling her back against her chest. She rested her chin on Claire's shoulder, her warm breath tickling Claire's ear as they watched the last rays of sunlight fade into the ocean horizon. "Is the volume balance acceptable, Miss Engineer?" Maya teased quietly, her hands tightening around Claire's waist. Claire rested her hands over Maya's arms, leaning back into her warmth with a deep, content sigh. "The ocean has a terrible peak frequency, the room reverberation is completely uncalibrated, and there isn't a single control slider in sight." Maya chuckled softly, pressing a gentle kiss to the side of Claire's neck. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," Claire whispered, turning around within Maya's arms to face her. The firelight danced in Maya's dark hazel eyes, turning them into pools of warm amber. The playful teasing in her posture melted away, replaced by an intense, breathtaking tenderness that made Claire's pulse leap into her throat. Maya raised her right hand, her long fingers gently cupping Claire's jawline. Her thumb traced the smooth line of Claire's lower lip, her touch impossibly light, as if she were handling something precious and delicate. "No scripts, Claire," Maya murmured, her voice dropping into a hush that vibrated straight through Claire's chest. "No broadcasts. No thousands of listeners out in the dark. Just us," Claire whispered back, completing the phrase that had become their private sacred vow. "Just us," Maya agreed softly. Maya leaned down, closing the small distance between them, and brought her lips to Claire's in a kiss that was slow, deep, and devastatingly sweet. It carried none of the frantic, nervous urgency of their first kiss in the control room. This was a kiss born of absolute certainty, a quiet, unshakable declaration of love that lingered in the warm, wood-scented air of the cabin. Claire let out a quiet sigh into Maya's mouth, her hands moving up to clasp behind Maya's neck, her fingers tangling into the thick, soft waves of her hair. She pulled Maya closer, sinking into the kiss, feeling the firm, steady beat of Maya's heart pressing against her own chest. Maya's hands moved down to hold Claire firmly by the waist, deepening the touch with a possessive, breathtaking warmth that made Claire's knees feel wonderfully weak. They stood together in front of the tall windows, wrapped in each other's arms, while the fire roared in the hearth and the dark ocean roared against the shore below. When Maya finally pulled back to breathe, her forehead remained rested against Claire's. Her eyes were dark, clear, and shining with an unspoken promise. I spent years talking into a microphone, searching for the right words to describe what I was missing, Maya whispered softly, her fingers gently stroking Claire's cheek. And then you walked into my studio, stood on the other side of the glass, and made me realize I didn't need words at all. Claire smiled, tears of pure happiness welling at the corners of her eyes as she reached up to kiss the corner of Maya's mouth. You don't need a script anymore, Maya, Claire said softly, her voice steady and full of love. We're on our own frequency now. Maya smiled back, a radiant, breathtaking expression that warmed Claire to her very core, and wrapped her tightly in her arms once more, leading her toward the warmth of the fire as the stars began to bloom across the dark coastal sky. Saturday morning broke over the Oregon coast in a stunning cascade of pale pink, amber, and gold. The storm had retreated entirely, leaving behind a sky as clear as glass and an ocean that glimmered like scattered diamonds under the soft autumn sun. Inside the cabin, the heavy cedar air was warm, smelling faintly of dying embers from the stone hearth, fresh pine, and the rich, dark aroma of hazelnut coffee brewing in the kitchen. Claire woke slowly, emerging from the deepest, most peaceful sleep she had known in years. She was lying on her side, tangled in a thick white duvet, her head resting on the rise of Maya's shoulder. One of Maya's long arms was draped securely over Claire's waist, her hand resting flat against Claire's stomach, warm and anchor-heavy. Claire lay still for a long time, watching the sunlight bounce off the floorboards and trace gold lines across the ceiling. Her body felt completely light, freed from the perpetual tension that used to coil in her spine. She turned her head slightly, her gaze tracing the calm, sleeping features of the woman beside her, the long dark lashes resting against smooth cheekbones, the faint, soft curve of Maya's lips, and the relaxed posture of a heart at rest. Without thinking, Claire raised her hand, her fingertips hovering just a fraction of an inch above Maya's face, gently outlining the sharp line of her jaw without actually touching her skin. A low, sleepy hum vibrated in Maya's chest. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing hazel eyes that were warm, dark, and immediately focused on Claire. You're hovering, Thorn, Maya murmured, her voice thick with sleep, gravelly and impossibly sweet. I was observing, Claire corrected softly, her fingers dropping down to lightly touch Maya's chin. You don't make any noise when you sleep. It's almost unnatural for someone who talks for a living. Maya smiled, a lazy, gorgeous expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She shifted, pulling Claire closer until their foreheads pressed together, her hand sliding up Claire's back beneath her oversized shirt to rest warm against her spine. I only speak when I have something worth saying, Maya whispered, her breath brushing warm against Claire's lips. And right now, I'd rather just listen to you. Claire's heart gave a familiar, sweet flutter against her ribs. She leaned forward, pressing a soft, lingering kiss against Maya's mouth. Good morning, Vance. Good morning, my love, Maya murmured into the kiss, her hand tightening on Claire's back, deepening the touch for a long, breathtaking beat before letting her go with a soft, affectionate sigh. By 10 in the morning, They had left the cabin to walk down the steep, wooden staircase winding down the cliff face to the secluded Black Sand Cove below. The air on the shoreline was crisp and biting, but the bright sun kept the cold at bay. The tide was out, leaving behind pristine pools of clear salt water in the dark rock formations along the beach. Huge grey driftwood logs lay scattered across the wet sand, worn smooth by years of ocean waves. Maya walked close beside Claire, wearing a heavy charcoal coat with her hands shoved deep into her pockets, her scarf tucked around her chin against the ocean breeze. Claire walked with her arm linked snugly through Maya's, her boots making satisfying crunching sounds in the firm, wet sand. They walked in comfortable silence for nearly a mile, listening to the deep, thunderous boom of the Pacific surf crashing against the offshore sea stacks. "What are you thinking about?" Maya asked softly, turning her head to look down at Claire as they stopped near a massive, sun-bleached cedar log. Claire looked out at the vast blue horizon, taking a deep, icy breath of the salt air. "I was thinking about my transfer request back in New York." Maya froze slightly, her hazel eyes searching Claire's face, a sudden shadow of uncertainty passing through her features. "What about it?" Claire turned to face her fully, catching both of Maya's hands in her own gloved ones. "When I signed the transfer papers to come to Seattle, I told myself it was just a temporary career move. A 6-month assignment to fix the technical production issues at K-Wave and then move on to the next market. And now?" Maya asked, her voice dropping into a quiet, tentative hush, her fingers tightening around Claire's hands. Claire stepped closer, leaning into Maya's space until their coat buttons brushed. She looked up into Maya's eyes with a clarity so bright it took Maya's breath away. "Now I realize I wasn't running toward a new job," Claire said softly, her voice steady and full of unshakable conviction. "I was running toward you. And I'm never leaving Seattle, Maya. Not as long as you're there." Maya stared at her, her dark eyes shining as a profound relief washed over her features. A brilliant, radiant smile broke across her face, the kind of open, unshielded smile she never gave to her broadcast audience, reserved exclusively for the woman holding her hands on the shore. "Thank God," Maya whispered, a breathless, happy laugh escaping her lips. "Because I was already planning how to sabotage your return flight to New York." "You wouldn't dare," Claire laughed softly. "Try me, Thorn," Maya murmured, stepping forward, wrapping her arms tightly around Claire's waist, and lifting her slightly off her feet. Claire gasped in surprise, her arms wrapping securely around Maya's neck as Maya spun her around once in the crisp sea air before setting her down on the dry sand near the driftwood. When Claire's feet touched the ground, Maya didn't let go. She framed Claire's face in her hands, her thumbs caressing her flushed cheeks, and kissed her with a fierce, joyful intensity that tasted of cold salt air and sweet, limitless promise. Claire kissed her back with everything she had, leaning her entire weight against Maya, feeling the warmth of her body and the steady, solid beat of her heart. The ocean roared around them, but inside the circle of Maya's arms, Claire felt entirely grounded, safe, and home. That evening, as twilight returned to the coast, they sat together on the heavy wool rug in front of the roaring stone fireplace inside the cabin. A small portable radio, a vintage battery-operated receiver Maya had brought along, sat on the small coffee table behind them, playing low, soft jazz from a local Oregon station. Maya sat with her back against the sofa, her legs stretched out toward the hearth. Claire sat between Maya's knees, leaning back comfortably against Maya's chest, wrapped in a shared plaid fleece blanket. Maya's arms were crossed over Claire's chest, holding her close, her chin resting softly on Claire's shoulder. The room was filled with the dancing orange light of the fire, the quiet crackle of burning cedar wood, and the distant, soothing hum of the tide outside the window. Do you know what tomorrow night is? Maya murmured softly, her cheek resting against Claire's dark hair. Saturday shift, Claire replied, her fingers idly tracing the line of Maya's forearm beneath the blanket. We go back to the studio at 11. Back to the glass partition, Maya said, a playful edge returning to her soft voice. Back to the red light. Back to you giving me stern hand signals when I talk too much. Claire turned her head slightly, her lips grazing the line of Maya's neck. You love my hand signals. I do, Maya admitted quietly, her gaze fixing on the flickering flames in the hearth. I love everything about working with you. But it's going to be different now. How? Claire asked softly. Maya tightened her grip around Claire's waist, pressing a sweet, lingering kiss to the shell of Claire's ear. Because now, Maya whispered, every word I say into that microphone isn't just going out into the dark to see if someone is listening. I already know who is listening. And she's holding the control board. Claire closed her eyes, a deep, overwhelming sense of warmth filling her chest. She reached up, weaving her fingers with Maya's, holding her tight against her heart. The signal is crystal clear, Maya, Claire murmured softly. I'll always be listening. Outside, the stars blazed bright and clear over the quiet Oregon coastline, but inside, by the warmth of the fire, two hearts had finally found their permanent frequency, a frequency that required no scripts, no broadcast limits, and would never go off the air. Sunday night in Seattle returned with a soft, persistent drizzle that painted the asphalt of First Avenue in slick, luminous shades of gold, blue, and amber. The city felt quiet, wrapped in its familiar autumn mist, as if welcoming them back from the wild, roaring coastline of Oregon. Inside Studio B, the atmosphere was charged with a renewed, vibrant warmth. It was 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the start of their late-night broadcast. Claire sat at her executive mixing board, her fingers moving across the master controls with effortless, joyful precision. The lingering scent of hazelnut coffee from their weekend trip seemed to follow them into the control room, mingling with the familiar metallic warmth of the vacuum tube amplifiers. Her duffel bag sat neatly in the corner of her office, but her focus was locked onto the console in front of her. Through the clear partition glass, Maya was settling into her high-backed leather chair. She wore a tailored black blazer over a soft olive green silk shirt, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders in natural waves. Her dark hazel eyes were bright, brimming with an unshakable confidence that seemed to illuminate the entire studio booth. When Maya caught Claire's eye, she didn't just smile, she offered a slow, lingering look that made Claire's pulse leap into her throat. Maya raised two fingers to her lips, pressing a silent, secret kiss against her fingertips before blowing it directly toward the partition glass. Claire felt a hot, beautiful flush spread across her neck and cheeks. She quickly looked down at her audio monitor, though a broad, happy smile tugged at her lips that she couldn't possibly hide. She flipped the studio intercom line on. Vance, you're on camera feed. Try to maintain some professional decorum before the station manager checks the live video stream. The station manager isn't watching at 11:30 on a Sunday night, Thorne, Maya's voice smooth-talked through Claire's headphones, rich, warm, and brimming with playful affection. Besides, I'm just expressing appreciation for my favorite audio engineer. Your favorite audio engineer is going to lower your master microphone gain if you don't review your track list, Claire countered, though her voice lacked any real severity. You wouldn't dare, Maya hummed into the receiver, her tone dropping into that low, velvet frequency that made Claire's hands tremble slightly over the sliders. You love my vocal range too much. Claire shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips as she adjusted a treble knob. Review your track list, Maya. 10 minutes to broadcast. Through the glass, Maya chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated straight through Claire's headset, before picking up her printed cue sheets with an obedient nod. At 11:59 p.m., the digital timer on Claire's central monitor began its final countdown. Claire pulled on her heavy leather headphones, isolating herself in the rich, clear world of audio frequencies. Her hands moved over the board with practiced mastery, fading out the automated station ID, bringing up the soft, ambient synth opening track, and prepping the main vocal channel. 3, 2, 1. The red, on-air, light above the soundproof door flared to life, casting its bright, crimson glow across the glass partition. Maya pulled her microphone close, leaning in until her lips were mere millimeters from the phone guard. Good evening, Seattle, Maya began, her voice gliding into the night airwaves like silk over velvet. This is the midnight shift on K-Wave 90.3, broadcasting live across a wet, beautiful city. She paused, leaning back slightly in her chair, her eyes locking directly onto Claire's through the partition. The playful teasing in her eyes melted away, replaced by an open, radiant depth that took Claire's breath away. Over the weekend, I went down to the coastline, Maya continued softly into the broadcast, her words unscripted, flowing straight from her heart. I stood by the ocean, watching the waves hit the shore, and I realized something important about noise. Most of our lives are spent surrounded by static, unnecessary demands, loud schedules, and fear of what comes next. But if you're lucky, if you're truly, remarkably lucky, you find one person whose voice cuts straight through the static and brings you completely home. Claire sat frozen behind her console, her breath catching in her chest. She looked up through the glass. Maya was staring right at her, her dark hazel eyes shining with a fierce, tender devotion that felt like a warm physical touch. Tonight, Maya murmured softly into her microphone, this show is dedicated to the person who holds my frequency. The person who turned off the static and gave me a reason to stay. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs, tears of overwhelming happiness springing to her eyes. She reached out with a slightly trembling hand, gently raising the master vocal slider, framing Maya's voice in a warm, flawless acoustic aura for every listener tuned in across the Pacific Northwest. At 1:30 a.m., as the station entered a 15-minute continuous music set, Maya pushed open the soundproof booth door and walked out into the control room. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight over to Claire's chair, reached down, and took Claire's hand, gently pulling her up from the console. Claire stood up, stepping directly into Maya's arms. Maya wrapped her jacketed arms tightly around Claire's waist, holding her close against her chest, burying her face into the crook of Claire's neck with a deep, content sigh. Was that too unscripted for you, Miss Engineer? Maya whispered against Claire's skin, her warm breath sending a sweet shiver down Claire's spine. Claire wrapped her arms securely around Maya's neck, pulling herself flush against Maya's body. It was completely against network guidelines, Claire murmured, a breathless laugh breaking through her emotional tone. And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Maya pulled back just enough to look into Claire's eyes. She raised her hand, her long fingers gently cupping Claire's jawline, her thumb lightly tracing the warm curve of Claire's cheekbone. I love you, Claire, Maya whispered, her voice stripped of all performance, raw and completely honest. I love you, Maya, Claire replied softly, leaning up to press her lips against Maya's in a deep, lingering kiss. The kiss was slow, warm, and filled with the unshakable certainty of two people who had found their forever home. Maya's lips moved against Claire's with a tender, possessive sweetness that made Claire's entire body feel warm and weightless. Claire tightened her grip on Maya's shirt, anchoring herself in the overwhelming reality of Maya's love. When Maya finally pulled back, her forehead rested gently against Claire's. She let out a quiet, happy sigh, her dark hazel eyes glowing in the faint blue light of the monitor screens. "We have 6 minutes before the music set ends," Maya murmured softly, her thumb gently stroking Claire's lip. "I know," Claire whispered, her smile radiant and unshielded. 6 minutes of total, uninterrupted quiet. "With you," Maya added, leaning in to press another sweet, soft kiss to the tip of Claire's nose. "Quiet is my favorite sound." As the broadcast drew to its final close at 3 a.m., the red light above the booth door faded back to black. The studio fell into its quiet, automated overnight rhythm. Claire completed her digital log entries, shutting down her monitoring channels one by one with a sense of peaceful satisfaction. Maya walked out of the booth, her leather jacket slung over her arm, holding Claire's coat in her hand. She held the coat open for Claire, helping her slide her arms into the sleeves before wrapping her arms around Claire's shoulders from behind, pulling her back against her chest. They stood together for a long moment in the quiet, empty control room, looking at their shared reflection in the dark glass of the booth window. "Ready to go home?" Maya whispered into Claire's hair, her hands resting warmly over Claire's waist. Claire turned her head, pressing a soft kiss to Maya's cheek. "I'm already home." Maya smiled, a bright, beautiful expression that filled the quiet dark room with warmth, and slid her hand into Claire's, intertwining their fingers tightly. Together, they walked out of Studio B, stepping down the quiet hallway of K-Wave 90.3 and out into the cool, rain-washed Seattle night. Outside, the rain continued to fall softly against the city streets, but under their single umbrella, wrapped in each other's warmth, their signal remained clear, perfect,